Hi, guys, and welcome back to another episode of Women in Math and STEM, where our mission is to reach out to as many professionals, aspiring professionals, students, whatever you name it. We try to reach out to them, who essentially support the initiative of bringing more women and young girls into the STEM field. So, with that being said, as always, feel free to open up the description or transcript to better follow along, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. Hello, and thank you so much for coming to the call today and talking with me. Just to sort of start off, do you mind sharing your career journey, introducing yourself, as well as sort of what got you inspired and sort of motivated you to specialize in healthcare data and such fields?
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me. My name is Vera. I currently serve as the Chief Scientific Officer of a healthcare data company called DataVant. And I've been with the company for a little less than 7 years now. I started my job here as an early stage employee when the company was a very small startup based out of San Francisco. I was employee number 8. And through a series of growth and mergers and acquisitions, the company right now is over 7,000 people, and we do a lot of work exchanging healthcare data in a de-identified way for research, and also pulling folks' medical records for a number of different use cases. I'm a scientist by training originally. I started my career in molecular biology and biochemistry as as a lab research scientist focusing in cancer research. After I finished my PhD, I decided to try out the business world and started first as a consultant and then at DataVant. And what brought me here and what made me choose this career is a pretty strong interest in math and science. I just really enjoyed those. Those were my favorite subjects in school for as long as I can remember. But B, I wanted to be able to make an impact wherever I could either be able to shape population health or new drug discovery. And working in health data helped me kind of do my little part in both.
Think you mentioned that the company now works with a lot of data. I was just wondering, what are some sort of challenges that come with healthcare data and sort of how you address them and overcome those challenges?
No, that's an excellent question. So when you think about healthcare data, that is probably some of the most precious and most important data that any individual has. It's the kind of data that folks want to be there whenever a physician is trying to make a decision on their health or whenever there's policies to be made. But also it's the kind of data that they don't want shared without their permission or in a way that would eventually potentially harm a patient. So working in the healthcare data world, priority number 1, number 2, number 3 in my mind is making sure that folks can get access to the right data in the right place at the right time, while at the same time protecting patient privacy. So I would say the biggest challenge that we as a company and the industry has is how do you exchange healthcare data for use cases that are good for the world in a way that protects patient privacy. So a lot of the technology that I work with and that my teams help build and develop is around de-identification of data. You can do a lot of really, really good research at the population level without needing to know that patient 123 is Angelina or Vera or anybody else, while still being able to find to discover new interesting things that could benefit those patients and patients that look like them. The second challenge is probably just one of data storage and distribution in general. About 30% of all data in the world right now is data that has to do with healthcare. And it could be as small as an individual's medical record, a couple of dozen pages in a PDF, to as large as genomic data about many patients that suffer from a particular cancer, and which is if you take all of the potential healthcare data together as zettabytes of data, I don't know, it's 10 to the power of something that I don't remember anymore. So how do you work with data that keeps growing and growing and growing and potentially fragmenting in different places in a way that is reasonable, secure, safe, and privacy preserving?
Makes sense. I think you also mentioned that you were the chief data scientist at the company you work at. I was just wondering what that looks like on a day-to-day basis in terms of work.
So I'm a chief scientific officer, which in practice actually means building product. So the primary thing that DataVant produces and sells and licenses out is software. It's software that helps you be able to say that patient 123 in a medical claims data set and patient 456 in an electronic health record or in laboratory data is the same individual without needing to know who that individual is. And there's a lot of stuff that goes into building that software, making sure it's secure, it's scalable, and building things around it that help folks, make better choices with data, like knowing like which data sets to put together to answer a research question, how to do the risk assessment around privacy on that data. So what my team does, some of them are data scientists, a lot of them are product managers, and a lot of them are engineers. And some of what they do is build a roadmap over the course of many years for bringing those products to life, figuring out what our customers need, what the job to be done is, to use kind of like a product management term, what needs to be built now, what can be built later, and how do you scale that over time and over customers.
I think you also mentioned that you originally like went to college for molecular biology. I was just wondering, like coming from like a scientifically trained background, how that has sort of impacted your perspective on like working with healthcare data.
Um, in a couple of ways. One actually is a little bit of like a career advice that I wish I could give myself back in the day when I was in high school and college. So I very much loved science, and I knew that at some point or another I would do something either in math or science with my career. But at the time, I didn't know what all of the options were. Like in my mind, I was either going to be a university professor, a doctor, or a scientist. Like those were the three careers that I knew and I appreciated. And with time, and I built like the whole like, this is what I'm going to study in college. This is my 5-year plan, et cetera, et cetera. I'm going to go to grad school. I'm going to run my own lab, all of the stuff. And at some point or another, I came to the realization that there were many, many more options of things to do that might not even have existed when I was in high school and I was thinking about it. Like, I don't think I could have predicted the AI revolution, just to take like a practical example. So one advice is kind of follow the interest that you have, but not necessarily like be dead set on a career path, because there's a lot of things that you can do with the same interests. So going back to molecular biology, again, I don't do any of the work that I used to do in the lab on a day-to-day basis. I don't do any experiments. I'm not particularly discovering science, but I know that there's certain molecular pathways that are aberrant in certain cells that can cause cancer. And now I can take that knowledge and look at healthcare data and be able to say, you can take a huge patient population, stratified based on their genomic data, based on molecular profiles, and be able to eventually help folks who develop drugs, develop more targeted therapies for different patients. And I'm able to tell that story in a much more educated way because of the work that I did as a scientist, identifying some of those molecular pathways. When I was doing that work, I would have never guessed that I would be applying it to population health and health data and pharma. But it's a very, very good foundation, and it makes me a lot more credible in my job today.
Sounds good. I think you also mentioned the AI revolution. So I was curious, since you mentioned before you've been working around like in healthcare data for around 7 years. I was just curious about like how unexpected like global events such as like the pandemic or like the AI revolution affects your day-to-day work and or like in the long run as well.
So I'll start with the pandemic actually, because it gets me to an initiative that we've done here at DataVant that I'm super, super proud of to this day. So before kind of the shelter in place ordinances that came around March of 2020, DataVant was a very small company based in San Francisco. We all worked in an office, and we were very much like of the mindset, like we need to be together. We need to be in an office to work together. So the first thing that the pandemic did is everybody went remotely. We realized that we were just as effective, even more effective, working remotely and being closer to our clients, being able to get on Zoom and then talk to them a lot more than we were able to do before. But the other thing, and this is more just like how you run a business, we learned to run our business in a different way that made us scale better. Now we hire people all over America. The second thing that we learned is when you have such a like world-changing event as the COVID-19 pandemic, healthcare data becomes more and more important than ever. So in the first month after kind of like the shelter-in-place ordinances in the United States, we got together with a number of our clients and we put together what's called the COVID-19 research database, which is still actually in effect, which was a way to share data pro bono for nonprofits, for academics to look at kind of like COVID-19 related data as it was coming and gets to put research, published research out there as quickly as possible. And I think like over 3,000 researchers took part in the database. There's hundreds of publications that came out of it. Some that had to do more with like how the disease affects people who have diabetes, obesity, etc. Some others were around how do we open and close schools during the pandemic, and other research that was kind of like all over the spectrum. So I thought it was really cool that like even during a time of like extreme adversity, the work we were doing was not just like sustainable, but even more important because people couldn't get together and all they had was data that they could potentially access in near real time. So I was really proud of like what the team was able to do, kind of like rallying and almost like in a hackathon style, trying to put something together that was good for the world. So that was one thing. Then you mentioned kind of the AI revolution, for lack of a better word. There's a lot of interesting things that you can do right now that technology allows us to do that even 7 years ago when I started DataVant, we couldn't do. So one of the things that we, as I mentioned, care a lot about is patient privacy. So one of the things that we do is help de-identify data so that, like you can still work with it without putting at risk patient privacy. And with tabular data, like, like column 1 is first name, column 2 is last name, et cetera, you can do that work pretty easily. You roll up some information, you delete some information, and you have the identified data set and one that you can assess for risk. But what happens if you have doctor's notes, which are these whole, like, it's called unstructured text, like long notes, every doctor writes them differently. How are you going to scrub that information? When we started 7 years ago, you could do some things with software to do that, but it was never like really, really perfect. Now in the large language model world, which like I'm trying to learn basically on the job as the industry is evolving, you can do a lot more educated redaction of data sets because you can train models based on like large data sets. And there's many models right now that are good for de-identification. So what this lets us do is put sort of like physician notes in play for research as well, because now you can share that data in a better de-identified way. Before, our researchers would have to delete that information and not share it because they weren't sure that they could, scrub every piece of information that was in a doctor's note. And now with AI techniques, we can do that better. There's other things that you can do better. You can do analytics faster. You don't need to be a trained engineer to be able to ask a question of a large data set. You can ask like a regular layperson sentence and get like a regular layperson answer behind it. So my hypothesis is that AI will actually help democratize healthcare data research, where not everybody not only the people who are trained data scientists and engineers will be able to do the work. We can, assuming, like all the safety and security pieces are in play, we can allow more folks to be able to ask really smart questions and take really smart actions in the benefit of public health.
That sounds amazing. And then just to sort of end off, I was curious if you had any pieces of advice or honestly anything for students who are interested in pursuing a career in healthcare or healthcare data.
So first of all, I think the world needs you. There's so many problems in healthcare that have not been solved today that are waiting for the right and motivated person to be able to ask those questions. If you're looking in your day-to-day life and you're like, why hasn't somebody figured out a better way to do, I don't know, smoking cessation, solving rare disease problems, solving healthcare cost problems, and you're passionate about those type of questions, look to see who in the world is trying to solve for and then start researching, start collaborating, start taking the right classes. there's so much that needs to be done. So like if you're interested in the world of healthcare and healthcare data, there's a lot of opportunities out there for folks who have that interest. The second thing that I'll mention is what kind of like the advice that I would give myself if I were back in time, which is follow your passions, but don't be super rigid on what career. There's a lot more careers out there than like the doctors, lawyers, etc. That we've been taught in school. And then the third one is build a foundation. I think learning kind of like the basics of mathematics, basics of biology, chemistry, etc. Um, are always like are going to be the baseline for whatever work you decide to do in STEM in the future. Like you can always like specialize on top of that, but early on in high school and in college, try to take as many survey courses as possible in those fields. Then I would say a fourth one is take an interest in stuff outside of science. In business, most of the most successful people that I see are good technically, but also know how to communicate, know how to write well, know how to present well, and those are those are skills that would be useful for any job, but even more so useful in the startup world and in the healthcare world.
Okay, thank you so much. It was absolutely phenomenal talking to you. Thank you.
Okay, lost you.